As you can see, this refers to the March 2024 bulletin, and here is what it looks like. You don't have to have it by your side, but that's what the front cover was. This splendid dial, which features in the article about sundials for the Russian market. More about that in a moment. As usual, this is my address at the bottom of the right-hand side, so that you can email me with any comments that you like. And I seem to be stuck. What's happening? Yes, there is. If you want to look for the videos of past follow-ups, then you can ask Mr. Google to search for the British Sundial Society YouTube channel. If you want to go there more directly, then you can go to youtube.com /at the-BSS. And the dot is very important between YouTube and com, and the stroke and the @ sign. That's possibly more difficult, but if you can remember that, it's nice and quick. And that will take you straight to all the earlier recordings, and it will take you to the recording of this meeting in due course. Well, next we, as always, have a quick look at my abbreviated version of the list of contents, where you can see pretty much everything listed in abbreviated form, and there are the usual candidates for not being talked about, although we may actually talk about the editorial, but we'll come to that in a moment. These are the principal articles, and of this lot, I highlight these 3 articles for particular mention, since it's just possible that they will take us the most time. But that's not something that is, as it were, cut into stone. We can discuss any article we like. We'll certainly look at all of them. Right, well, I am now going to unshare my screen, and Martin's will now share his screen and show us the first few pages of the bulletin. So over to you, Martins. Here is the front cover.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And now if you look at the inside front cover and the table of contents, and as Martin, as we'll hear in a moment, there's actually a mistake in the editorial. We'll ignore that just for the moment. Editorial written by me, and now move to the first proper article by John Davis. And John is signed in somewhere, so can we hear you talk?
So, well, let me check whether
yes, I've just unmuted myself, so you should be able to hear me.
Yes, we can hear you too. This is even better. So excellent. Well, if you'd like to take us through this article or give us a resume of it, or if you want to wait for questions, then up to you. But maybe we can start by the mistake in the editorial, was I implied that this was the earliest scientific instrument known in Britain. As you pointed out at the rehearsal, it's actually the earliest scientific instrument which has a known date. Is that right?
It's the earliest English-made item. So there are some Islamic items which have got dates which are earlier, but I don't count those. It needs to be English-made.
So the earliest English-made scientific instrument with a date.
With a date.
Yet noted in Britain, in England.
Yes, England.
Okay.
England, yes.
England, right. So maybe some others in Scotland. Okay, on to the next page, Martins. Right, now we have a picture of it, and the amazing way in which you were able to reverse engineer from the date of Easter information, but despite the fact that it says in fairly clearly that it's 1311, actually it's not 1311, it's slightly earlier than that. Can you give a brief explanation as to why that 1311 is there and what it's all about?
Okay, well, first I should own up to the error, which is mine. In the first column, I call it a quadrans vetustissimus. And that, as all good Latinists will know, is the oldest quadrant. And that term I've now found out was actually invented in about 1932, and it really refers to some Islamic quadrants, not this particular one. So what I should have called it is a quadrans vetus, i.e. the old quadrant. Now, of course, that term itself couldn't be used until someone had invented the new quadrant. But the type of quadrant which we're looking at, which has got unequal hours, seasonal hours, whatever you like to call them, that was certainly written about by Sacrobosco as well as other people in the middle of the 13th century, so quite a lot earlier. And he described two sorts, one which has got a sliding cursor. Now, there's only half a dozen or so, most of those, and they're all very shiny and very expensive in the British Museum and Oxford and places like that. And they can be used at any latitude. But Sacrobosco called this one the quadrans simplus or simplex, i.e. the simple one. And it's in theory latitude independent, but in practice you really don't want to use it for too far from the low latitudes near the equator. So that's what we've got here. Just those set of lines, arcs. They're all arcs of circles on the left-hand side of the picture. So each arc does 2 hours, symmetrical about noon, and you use the plumb bob, which of course is missing, to find the altitude of the sun at any given time. So that's how it works. Very simple. Now there are a few of these around, often found by metal detectorists, but this one is unique, literally unique, because it's got this volvelle on the back. And I've never seen a volvelle like that on any instrument before. And decoding it took me a couple of days. But you can see on the horizontal line there, it's got the date 1311, which also appears in one of the other pictures. And of course, the assumption is that that's the date of the instrument, and that's what we all thought. And that's what Christie's called it when they put it up for auction. It made a good price. It made just over £100,000, so it's not a cheap instrument. But it's obviously to do with Easter, and in fact, what you've got around it is the dates of Easter Sunday for 32 years, so 32 pairs of cells around the circle, and they're marked either A or M for April or March, plus the date. And after a lot of working out, I sorted it that you can look at one date with one pointer, and the other pointer which is 19 squares away, will point to the next year's Easter. So to get all of the Easter days, for all 32 of them, you sort of leapfrog round and round this circle. And in fact, the very earliest of them is for 1306, which is what I believe is when it was made. You didn't need to know when it was Easter on 1305, but you did in 1306, and from there on in. So that's how I date it, at early 1306 or very late 1305, and that's what's in the table here. Why has it got 1311 marked? Well, 1311 is the start of the 19-year Metonic cycle, and that's obviously very, very important. So that's the device. That's how it works. Of course, it turned up with almost no provenance, so we needed to sort out that it really was very early and not something that someone had sort of cobbled together in their backyard and buried for a month or two and was now hoping to make a small fortune out of. And that's what all the XRF is about. I won't go through the details of that, but suffice to say that it got characteristics which show that it was made in England, but the brass was using copper, which was mined and processed in Germany in a particular mountain, and that's because it's got these odd amounts of antimony and bismuth in it, and that's what that's all about. And that's new knowledge. Only in the last year or two have we been able to sort that out. So that gets its provenance sorted, at least in my mind. And we've also found that there's some wax in the engraving, red wax, because it's got coloured wax, which has got mercury, cinnabar, crushed cinnabar, which gives it the colour, and that gives a nice signal. The other thing which we were able to do was to look at the paleology of the numbers, the engraving, and there are certain characters which are very characteristic, 3, 5, and 8 in particular, and they match with some other instruments that are around. One of which is at Merton College in Oxford, and another one which was dug up by a metal detectorist just a few years ago. It's called the Chetwood Quadrant, and there's an article about that. Then at the bottom, there's another, bottom of page 7, there's another quadrant which is well known. It's now in the British Museum. It's a different type. It's known as a Profatius quadrant, and this is the new quadrant. And this has been studied in quite a lot of detail by Ellie Decker, who wrote a very excellent paper on it. And she worked out that the dates on the back, which you can see on the right-hand side of the figure, not the same table as on the one that we've been talking about, but that's a sort of a better version, if you like, of 19 dates of Easter. Or in fact, in this case, it's not Easter itself, but it's the Paschal Sunday, the Sunday from which all of the movable feasts are calculated. But this also shows leap years in particular places with certain Dominical letters. And in the 14th century, there are only 2 years that have got this particular combination, which Ellie found, and that's 1312 and 1388. So in theory, the quadrant could be either of those 2 dates. Ellie preferred the later date because this isn't a standard Profatius quadrant. It's sort of got a few modifications to it. So she thought that it probably took a few decades before they developed it. But luckily, before it was sold, and it sold for an enormous sum of money, I think in the end the British Museum paid £600,000 for it. But before that was done, Peter Northover in Oxford did some checks on the metal, and he made them available, let's say. They weren't sort of published, but they were made available to anyone who wanted to see them. And at the time, this was a decade or more ago, all he could say was that, well, it's certainly very old. It certainly, it was authentic. But in terms of dating, he couldn't do much better than saying it's 14th, possibly 15th, even 13th century, that is. But luckily, looking at the material again, we can see that it does fit this English material with copper coming in from Germany. And can we flip back to figure 3 on page 5, Martin? That one, yeah. And you can see right up at the top there, Canterbury Quadrant is right in that cluster with the characteristic antimony bismuth markings. So we happen to know that material went out of availability around the middle of the century, about the time of the Black Death in 1348. After that, you don't find it anymore. So that says that the Canterbury Quadrant is almost certainly from the first half, not the second half of the 14th century. And that means that of Ellie's 2 dates, 1312 looks far, far more likely than the 1388, which you'll see on the British Museum website and everyone else that looks at it. So I won't go into the further details, but it was a very interesting set of investigations. And I think that's probably all I need to say. I'll leave the rest to any questions.
Well, anybody got a hand up? I don't see any. I'm extremely grateful to you, John. That's absolutely model introduction. Yes, if only all our authors were that kind of detail as you are, I would be most grateful. Any questions, Martin?
No questions here. Oh, okay. So there is one comment by Chris and Pam.
Oh, yes.
Could you comment, please?
Come in, Chris.
Yeah. There's.
You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Yes. Please unmute, and then I will mute afterwards.
I'm sorry, I only just worked out how to unmute myself. It's way down in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen.
Yeah,
that's right. You'll get used to it with practice. At least I
I'm
hope
sure I will. I'm sure I will. Yeah, just merely wanted to say that in Oxford, the History of Science Museum, or the Museum of the History of Science, as many of us still know it, has part of an astrolabe, which it says is English and from around 1320, though quite how they know it's around 1320, I don't know. But I think they like to believe it's pre-1326 at least.
You mean 1526, Chris?
13. 1-3.
Yeah, you said 15.
I beg your pardon, you misheard me. Sorry, I meant to say 1320.
What you're saying is that I said in my introduction that the British Museum's astrolabe of 1326 was the earliest.
Yes, I'm saying Oxford has got one.
There's an earlier one.
I'm saying Oxford has got one which they claim is about 6 years earlier. I mean, it's a bit of a moot point, given that this quadrant is quite clearly earlier than that even. But I just thought I might mention it.
Well, that's certainly interesting. Of course, has it actually got the date engraved on it? Is the first question.
I don't believe it has. I don't know on what basis they claim that it's from around 1320. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was there recently, and I just made a mental note of that.
Okay. Well, afterwards, perhaps you could give me the inventory number, and I'll look into that.
Yeah, I can certainly do that. Yes. Yes.
When you say part of an astrolabe, is this just a plate or
it's just a reti, I think.
Right, just part of that.
Yeah, it's definitely on their website. I can't remember the inventory number. I'm sorry.
Is that the one that they call Bailey's Reti?
I beg your pardon, John. I don't recall. It may be.
Okay.
I
think I know which one you mean, because I've actually studied that one.
And
I think it's slightly later, 1330, 35 is what I would date it to. But
well, I happened to be there just recently. I was speaking to the to Silke, the new what's her title now?
Director
of the museum, and I mentioned your name, John, and I sort of said something to the effect of, "Oh, do you know John Davis?" And she sort of, "Yes, of course I know John Davis," kind of thing. So she obviously holds you in very high esteem, and I'm quite sure she would bow to your knowledge on such things. It just so happens that I've worked with a chap in Cambridge at Clare Hall, who studies computus, which is the study of the evolution of the calculation of the date of Easter. For him, I actually did make a little gadget, a sort of nomogram thing, which looks very much like the back of this quadrant, and it gives you the date of Easter in any year in the Julian calendar. I'll dig it out and send it to you, John, because I think you might be amused by it.
Yes, sounds fun.
Yeah, it is fun. Yeah.
I see Jeff Thurston has a hand up. So Jeff, unmute yourself and there you are. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, and it relates to what Chris has just been talking about. This device might have been discarded as obsolete back in the 14th century, which would have been unfortunate because the Julian Easter dates repeat after an interval of only 532 years. So it would have been perfectly usable again back in the 19th century, and as it will in the 24th century.
Just hold on to it. Yes.
Yes, don't throw these things away.
That's interesting. The other reason for holding on to it is that quite a few of these quadrants have had the hour lines changed so that they now read equal hours rather than unequal hours. And Merton College have got a very famous one, which I'm currently writing up.
Right. Well, thank you very much, all, and Sandra. Is there anyone else?
No,
Vice
no more
Martin?
questions. No.
We can go on to article number 2, whatever that is. I think, yes, at the bottom end of John's article, there is a picture of a tripod, which I took. In fact, John and I are both involved in this. This is at Magdalen College, and I thought we'd better survey the site to see where North was, and that's what's going on there, but that's not something to dwell upon. Right, on the next page, we have this joke, which relates to an April Fool's joke in a local paper. In fact, Chris Lasby-Taylor has often referred to the housewives trick. Would you like to give us a very quick resume of it, Chris? He's gone to sleep. Right. Well, that stands by itself. I think let's move on to the next one.
Sorry, can I beg your pardon, I
Yes,
was muted.
yes,
Right,
please.
right to speak. I'd like to share my screen in which I can put up a picture of a dial that I made that uses the
Housewives trick.
Housewives choice.
Right. So, Martins, you can
Yeah,
unshare.
I stopped my screen. Yeah,
You
please.
dropped your screen.
Chris
Okay,
can come
let
up.
me find my picture. Here we go. I'll make that full screen. Okay, this is a dial I made. Can everyone see this?
Not yet.
No, not yet.
You should share and confirm it when we select and.
Oh,
You have to select and then click.
sorry, I need to.
You
So I've done
select
share. I've
which
clicked on share
window
screen,
or
and then
screen, and then there's blue
Then you-
button. I
Then,
think.
when you share your screen, you will see what's in
Oh
your.
yes, yep.
There you are.
Right now there is.
That's
Yeah.
it. Yes,
Thank
yes.
it says you can't share what the other participant is showing. You can see it now, can you?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to make it full screen if I could. How does that work? Is that better?
Yes.
That's better. Yes.
Okay, this is a dial which I made quite a few years ago, which uses the housewives trick, not for summertime, but for the rest of the year. So you can see it's on an octagonal slate base, on which there's a date scale for every day of the year.
All
And
right. Yes.
the dial itself is a circular brass dial, horizontal dial, and on any particular date, you set the scale so that the date mark for that day mark corresponds on both rings. So the brass dial is actually pivoted in the center, and it tells time to. I don't recall the exact error now, but it's really pretty effective. You know, it's only less than a minute or so, I think, out nearly all of the time.
Yes,
It doesn't cope with summertime, but for the rest of it, you just you know, rotate the brass part around to the correct time, and you've got something which is almost indistinguishable from clock time.
Have you written this up?
I don't believe I have. No,
An article in the bulletin on this would be very welcome.
I'm sure it would. I think you can see that there's the crest of the owner that I made it for.
Yes.
I would have to get their permission to publicize the location. That's the only slight issue I have.
Right. You can't anonymize the location.
Well, I could
you could-
hide that part of the dial, I suppose.
I don't think you. I see. It does actually say on the dial, does it?
Yeah, yeah, on the dial, just below, in front of the gnome one.
Yes, there is a coat of arms. I
If
see.
you can see a coat of arms, yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's the coat of arms of a particular family, and you know,
And so, the rest would be obvious. Yes. Yes.
that does make it a bit obvious as to where the dial is physically.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I might need to get permission to do that, which might be take a little while. But other than that, what I could do is maybe just blur that out.
Yes, pixelated out the way we talk
Just
about it.
pixelate that out. I think nobody's going to notice. Yeah, yeah. Another thing I just might mention about this dial is the reason I put it on an octagonal base is because at that particular location, the sunrise and sunset at midsummer and midwinter are almost exactly 45 degrees from due east and west and north and south, which gives you, once you know that, it gives you a clue as to the latitude. It's somewhere in
Yes.
Scotland.
Yes.
So I thought that was quite a
So
nice,
it's
a
definitely
nod,
north of me.
quite a yeah, quite a nice nod as to the latitude.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Right, super.
So that's what I've got to say on the Housewives trick. So I
So
think, yeah, if anybody doesn't know where this comes from in the first place, there's a wonderful book by
oh yes.
A.P. Herbert called Fun with the Sun. It's all about sundials. If you can get your hands on it, please do, because it's such fun, I think. He knows nothing. He was an independent MP for Oxford and a general good egg all round. And he knew almost nothing about the theory of sundials, but he knew a man who did, who was very senior in the Navy. And between them, they had huge fun exploring different ideas, mostly involving school protractors and things like that. And just proved that you really don't need engraved brass or anything like this to have a wonderful time with sundials.
Right, can you unshare your screen? I think you have to do that explicitly.
I will, if I can work out how to do that. I've got
I stopped already your sharing. Yeah, I
Oh,
think.
right,
Yeah.
okay.
Oh, you can turn me off, can you? Okay,
Oh,
good.
well, that's
Yes.
good news. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, next page, please, Martins. This is a write-up of last time's follow-up, so I don't think we need to say too much about that. We now get on to the next article, which I hope Maciek's going to be able to talk us through. Just don't need to say as much as John did, but I would be very grateful to you, Maciek, if you could just give a little bit of background to this article.
Hello.
Hello, yes, we hear you. Yes.
This article is a work of international team, which included John in UK, Valerie in Russia, and me in Poland. It started with an auction offer on which I spotted on eBay. It was offered by the English charity British Heart Foundation. And first thing which really shocked me, that this foundation already sold 1,800,000 items on eBay. And this interesting sundial. Which I didn't mention in the article was that the sundial came with a copy of an article from the Clocks magazine from 1986 on equinoctial sundials. This article came from a series by Christopher Daniels, former president of the society. Previous owner probably was trying to research this sundial. What is very interesting is that normally we do not put great attention to inclining sundials, and also only with this sundial I realized that there are actually two types of inclining sundials. The pretty standard and typical inclining sundial is the one with the angle tilted at 60 degrees, with the gnomon angle tilted 60 degrees, and with the hinge on the north side. Here, that one is a good example. And these sundials were mass produced in England in probably it started in late 17th century, but they were in heydays in 18th and 19th century. But the other type, so the sundial for north latitudes, with the angle of the gnomon of 45 degrees and hinge on the south side, so that can be used in latitudes from 45 to 90 degrees. It is a very specific typology, which is bound with Petersburg and northern Russia, and specifically with the trip of Peter the Great to London in 1696. He actually traveled through all the Europe and tried to collect as much knowledge as he could on how European societies functioned at that time, and trying to then put this knowledge in transformation of the Russian society. And also he had a stop in England for 2 or 3 months, as far as I remember. And after the trip, a number of English makers were attracted to Russia, also from other countries of the continent. And this included such known makers like John Bradley, and also makers of sundials like Francis Morgan or Benjamin Scott, who was apprentice of John Rowley. And some of these makers stayed in Russia and worked there, mainly in Petersburg. Here to the left, you see the one example of a sundial by Robert Tangate, who had his shop in Petersburg. But some others produced instruments in London, but for the Russian market. And actually, it's very hard to precisely say whether an instrument was made in England for a Russian market or manufactured locally. Later on in the 19th century, it's easier to distinguish between those two, because a factory of scientific instruments was established in Tula, city of Tula in Russia, and these instruments produced there had a specific look, which is easier to distinguish from those sundials made in England. This type of sundials for the north latitudes are also bound with the Petersburg, the city itself, which was founded by Peter the Great. And actually, in the 18th century, there was a need for instruments for those north latitude, and it seems that this idea of inclining dial for north latitudes came from English makers, because the earliest examples we have identified are by makers with English names. The next interesting thing is that the dating of this instrument. Normally, inclining sundials of this type are dated in catalogs, museum catalogs, or auction offers as 1800 or 1820. Here, actually, thanks to the extensive analysis of the equation of time conducted by John and by analysis of the coating of the compass bowl, which turned out to be nickel plating. It showed that the sundial was made not in the early 19th century, but rather comes from the mid of the century. And the equation of time usually on English sundials, maybe on some sundials, the dates of maxima and minima of equation of time are given to seconds, while on this instrument, which has equation of time in Cyrillic, the values of the maxima and minima are given to half of a minute, which makes made it quite hard to determine actually the date, the tables of equation of times which were used to engrave it. But John used some tricks which are described in the article, and this analysis pointed that probably the sources of the equation of time were from the 1840s, and probably this sets the time at which this sundial was made. As per the electroplating, this is another very interesting aspect, which we actually didn't expect to surface with this sundial. It was this electroplating technique with nickel, and generally electroplating was developed in 1940s, and actually at early 1940s, in parallel, first factories utilizing these techniques in mass numbers were erected in England and in Russia. From this perspective, the application of these electroplating techniques was very, I would say, progressive technology at the time when this sundial was made. And finally, the maker. The maker turned out to be a very interesting person, and actually a family of makers or dealers. Thomas Priestley, we actually didn't establish at what time he emigrated. He moved from UK to Russia. But surely he was active in 1820s. He offered his instruments at exhibition in Moscow. He also produced globes, and he's credited with the first globe with a Cyrillic script. As with the sundials, we are not sure if this globe was made in England, especially ordered to include to make it for a Russian market, for Russian clients, or whether it was assembled in Russia, as it has also some characteristics which point that it could have been made, or at least some parts of it, in the workshop of Carey, a known a London instrument maker and globe maker of the time. Priestley also wrote a book, a treatise on globes, how to use globes, with a number of exercises for students, how to use this instrument, also he made some other instruments which are in Russian collections. Here, what you see is a street at which he lived. So at the time, in the mid 19th century, it was really upscale, and still it is part of Moscow. And there were many residents, many from abroad. Similarly to English instrument makers attracted by probably Peter the Great, or at later times. The company, this company of Priestley's, it functioned in Moscow till the Bolshevik Revolution. So it actually, for at least 100 years. So this is interesting also. So I think this is a brief summary. Maybe John or Valerie could add something if you are interested in some specific part.
Well, thank you very much, Maciek. I noticed that both John is still here and Valerie. That it was particularly interesting to me, this business of the nickel plating. I had no idea that electroplating was around in the middle of the 19th century. That's a pretty early date for that. And of course, nickel plating is still very much used, because when you see gold plating, there is almost certainly nickel underneath it, because that's how it's done. John,
one word. The reason it became very so popular in Russia was that there was a great need for silver items. Of course,
yes.
Having silver plated is much cheaper than silver itself. But then it was found that with nickel it's even cheaper than
Yes.
with silver. So this is, I would say, 19th century value engineering, as we experience in almost everyday life.
John, do you have any extra comments? Maciek's given a pretty good resume, I think.
I think probably people aren't that interested in electroplating, but I certainly found it fascinating.
Well, I count me as another one, and you certainly know more about it than I do. I don't see any hands up, so maybe, Martins, we go on to the next one.
Okay.
I certainly found that a fascinating article myself. Here we have on the right side, Cameroon Award for being an expert on Islamic prayer times in Malaysia. I have.
So,
about 5 minutes ago, and we've because he is actually an extremely interesting guy, and one of our rare members from Asia, as distinct from the Antipodes. And you can see an example of his Sundial, which is quite close to Kuala Lumpur Airport. And naturally, being an Islamic country, it is replete with information about Islamic prayer times. But maybe he will join us later, in which case go on for a moment to the next article. And this is Mario's part 2. I'm going to say quite a lot about that in the postscript. So unless anybody's got any questions about it yet, I suggest we leave that one pending, and we'll come back to that at the end too. And after that, we have the Martin Jenkins suite of 6 sundials, which he had on his travels. I will note that this first one, this dodecahedral sundial, is one of the, just stay on that page, is one of the cleanest dodecahedral sundials I've come across. There are very few of these in the United Kingdom, such as there are in Scotland, and they're a bit bedraggled, but this one is in quite good condition. And just as a hint, this is going to be on next year's sundial. The French Republican calendar will feature this particular dial amongst 11 others. So let's move on to the next article after that. These are more from there. There we have Doug Bateman is with us. Doug, are you going to say anything about your floating sundial? Is Doug still with us? He was there.
Oh, yes, he's on call.
Because I know the idea is you just put this in a pool of water and it finds its own. I just wondered how waterproof it was.
Doug, you should unmute yourself. We cannot hear you. I see that you are speaking. Yeah.
Right, Doug, can you look at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen and you'll see a crossed out microphone. If you click that, it should uncross the crossing out.
Yep, perfect.
Oh, there we are, we can hear you.
I thought the leader had control over everybody.
Unfortunately, I cannot.
Anyway,
We can switch you off, we can't switch you on.
I think I've found some notes that suggested I bought it at Greenwich many years, just out of curiosity. And the little tank, it's rather like a photographic developer tank that we will remember when we did wet photography. And it is, of course, waterproof. It floats in that tank. And then the lower part of it, if Martins can zoom down onto the stalk contains a magnet, and which acts as ballast and then helps to point it north. And then my contact through the sundial list, Michael Hromek, had other information on other dials as well. So it was a bit of a fun article to put together.
Yes, probably doesn't merit much comment because it's self-explanatory, but it was an intriguing instrument. But I think I can see why it didn't have a really mass market, though. No doubt there were plenty of people.
It turns out that the designer, Bernard von Essen in Paris and Italy, designed lots of other scientific instruments from an astronomical point of view, but he said that this one, unfortunately, it didn't cover the tooling costs for the number of them made. So I don't know how many actually exist. Certainly Michael has one in Germany, but I have one here. But where the others are, we'll just have to hope that somebody will pop up and say, oh, I've got one or two of these, or lots of people may say they've got them, but I doubt it.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. Yes, it is an amusing article. We're grateful for anybody who writes articles for the Bulletin. We say thank you with a big pat on the back. On to the next page, maybe, Martins. And here we have newly reported dials. These are just lots of nice pictures. If you just go through them quickly, I'll ask you to pause maybe once or twice. There are one or two by Martins. Yes, this is one of mine on the right-hand page there, halfway down the left-hand column. This is Margaret Stanier, who used to be secretary of the British Sundial Society. This is memorial sundial I did for her, which is an unusual sundial in that it has a gnomon driven unequal hours using a subtle approximation, which comes about by bending the gnomon downwards about 9.5 degrees. If you keep going, you will see another sundial. The next page.
Yeah.
On the left-hand side there, you see one which was made almost exactly the same time. That was unveiled about a week later. And this was a week before the Margaret Stanier dial. It's 2010, so it's a long time ago. I don't know why they're newly reported. And you can see this is a mixture of Italian and Babylonian hours, giving a nice crisscross pattern. And if you take the average of the Italian hour's time and the Babylonian hour's time, you learn a whole but get common hour's time by magic, right? No more about that. Let's go on. I'll say something about this in the postscript, because that's clearly going to be about Italian hours. Just keep going. Next page. And now on the last page.
Yeah, the last page. Yeah, really.
That's the last page, and that just shows somebody looking after their sundial, which is in the garden, and during the winter when it's all snowy and icy, they cover it up with a little box to protect it. And that bottom right-hand corner photograph shows a view through the window, all rather good fun. Well, if Syed turns up, we will come back to him, but meantime I will go on to my postscript. So if you
just to note, we have one comment from Chris that the 19th century dial with Julian calendar makes sense, as in Russia they used calendar until the 20th century.
That's quite right. Yes, the Julian calendar was a long time being widely, the Gregorian calendar was a long time being accepted, not just in England but in other places too, notably Russia. Quite right.
And one more note, I have received so far just one response to this brief survey.
Well, remind people, yes, do take the survey.
Yeah, please look at your chat windows. There's a link to survey, and you can answer to 2 brief questions. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so if you unshare your screen,
I'm
Martin,
stopping share. Yes,
I will share mine. This doesn't ring any bells to me at all. Where are we? Oh yes, here we are. Yes, lot of clobber at top. Right, this is the article, 2-part article by Mario Arnaldi on Italian hours, which he correctly claims is one of the most important time systems of the past. And I'm going to deem all the rest of the screen, all this lovely blank space which you see below the title. I'm going to assume that's a white painted wall ready for a lot of sundials to be drawn on it. And I'm going to begin by drilling a circular hole and putting in a circular rod whose outer end I'm going to have serving as a nodus. So when the sun comes out, you get a shadow. And just as I did last time, but on a horizontal sundial, this is a vertical sundial, or the wall is vertical, the nodus support is horizontal, and we're looking at the shadow of the tip, which I'm going to mark with a yellow sticker. And then when the sun moves on, that will record the position of the projection of the sun when I made a first observation. I do the same thing again, another sticker, and the sun moves on, and then the sun goes in, and you can see that I've chosen the day of an equinox, in fact, the spring equinox, and I've got these points in a straight line, which I can join up. And if I had got up earlier and stayed at this later, and the sun had cooperated, I could have a still longer line on a day of an equinox, at least in theory. If the declination is frozen at 0 degrees, you get straight lines from the point projected onto a plane. If we repeat this experiment 1 astronomical month later, we get a hyperbolic arc, and we can label the space between these 2 lines as Aries, nominally the constellation through which the sun passes for the first astronomical month after the vernal equinox. Go on 2 more months and have Taurus and Gemini, and then we backtrack towards winter, and I'm going to mark in the winter side of the equinoctial line, and the winter solstice is at the very top. And these new lines, these 3 curves at the top, all end abruptly, and they end, of course, on the horizon line. You don't get any shadows before the sun rises and after the sun sets. And here we have the shadow. And you can tell that the wall is vertical because the red line, the horizon line, goes through that black spot, which is the base of the nodus support. This is just one way of chopping up the year, and it's quite a common way of chopping up the year on a sundial. but it's by no means the only way of doing things. I am at the moment restoring or helping to restore the well-known Sundial at Queen's College in Cambridge. That certainly has all 7 of these lines on it, but it has other ways of chopping up the year too. And here is another way, which is simply to have the calendar. And each line here represents the declination at the beginning of a calendar month. So I haven't marked the very top one. That's the beginning of January. So it's a little bit larger or rather less negative declination than the winter solstice. Likewise, the June is some way off being the June solstice. The problem with having dates is if you're going to have lines going right across, you get muddled up when you backtrack because the second half of the year, July, August, September, and so on, the first of the months don't obligingly coincide. And so you get interlacing curves and it's a total mess. The way they deal with this at Queen's is simply to have a column extracted from the 2 lines, and they're on either sides of the dial, so they're kept well separate. That's not the purpose of this particular postscript, so I'll move away from this and have yet another way of chopping up the year, which is to have constant declination lines corresponding to whole numbers of hours of daylight. And I go from here from 8 to 16, and I stress that 8 isn't quite the minimum, but it's the first whole number. At the latitude, I'm assuming for this sundial, about 49.5 degrees, just below British latitudes. You can get in the depths of winter, the length of the day is just under 8 hours. So there is an implicit winter solstice curve above that 8 o'clock line or 8 hour line, and there's a summer solstice one below the 16-hour line. And the Queen's sundial has these, what it calls length of day, written in Latin as longitudo diarum, length of days. And another way of doing things is to have declination lines for whole numbers of hours of sunrise and sunset. And there's plenty of ways of doing things, but I'm going to stick with this one because it suits my purposes. The next thing we need to think about, not chopping up the year, but chopping up the day. And this is the times that thinking about the way time was thought about in the past. And the way it was often done, it was simply to chop up the daylight period. And the first step is to divide the day into 2 equal parts, morning and afternoon. So I would put a spot on the 8 hour line, a spot 4 hours from sunrise. And then for 9 hours, it would be 4.5 hours from sunrise, 10, 5 hours, and so on. And I get a whole sequence of spots like that, which by observation are in a straight line. That should be no surprise. This is when the sun is due south on the meridian. The meridian is an arc of a great circle, and great circles, when you have a mnemonic projection, project into straight lines. And so we can draw a straight line through it. And this is the midday line. And we have, lo and behold, divided the day into 2 parts, morning on the left, afternoon on the right. And we notice this line doesn't align with the spot. A clear indication the wall is declining slightly towards the east. Having divided the day into 2 parts, let's now divide the morning into 2 parts and the afternoon into 2 parts. So we're quartering the day, and we can put more spots down. So 2 hours after sunrise for the 8 hour line, and so on like this. You get a whole another sequence of spots and equivalent on the right. And these aren't quite straight lines, as is well known. If we draw lines through them, you can, when you look at the video later, try and put a ruler along these lines, and you will find that they're not quite straight, though you might find that very hard to see. They are very, very straight lines, given that they're not actually straight lines. You see this much better if you extend them, because they meet, as does the meridian line, where the meridian line intersects the horizon line. That's a magic point on the sundials. That's due south on the horizon. And quite clearly, this curve does curve, but it curves what you might say at the last moment. That's divided the day into 4 parts. We have previously divided the day into 2 parts. Can you divide it into 3 parts? Well, yes, why not? I don't think people normally do this, but here we are on the 9 hour line. The intersections will be at 3 hours and 6 hours after sunrise, 6 parts. And here you can do it with 7. But of course, far away the most common use was to divide the daylight period into 12. This was used in ancient Egyptian times. Ancient Greeks used it, the Romans used it, and it was used in England way into the time of Shakespeare, early 17th century. This way of chopping up the day was very persistent. But eventually it was superseded by the more normal 24-hour day, 24 equal hours. And although there was a consensus that you should have 24 hours in the day, there was by no means a consensus as to where the reference point in the day should be, where one day ends and the next day begins. Now, we are accustomed to using midnight, not a very good time of day for a reference if you're using a sundial. And so it was equally popular to use midday. And of course, if you do that, you can mark off 1 hour, 1 common hour intervals either side. And here we have the standard sundial that you would normally think of. We're marking out 60-minute intervals before and after midday. These are also straight lines because they're projections of hour lines, which are great circles on the celestial sphere. And they all meet at a point, which is this extra spot I put up, which would serve as the root of a gnomon. If you draw a straight line from that point to the outer end of the nodus support, the nodus itself, you have a polar-oriented gnomon. But it took a very long time for that to be discovered. Right, well, enough of that. We now go back to my base point and consider alternatives to midday and midnight. And the obvious ones are sunrise and sunset. Sunset definitely won out. And here you see a line drawn one equal hour after sunrise. And that's Babylonian hour 23. And it's quite convenient to work backwards. And I've marked that with a 24 for the horizon line, 23 for this green line. And I can carry on like that, 22, working backwards. 24 represents the start of the day, which goes through the night. And there were very good religious reasons, if nothing else, for starting at sunset. The Jews had been using sunset as the start of the Sabbath, start of the standard Jewish day was at sunset. So likewise was the easy to this very day. Both the Jews and the Muslims deem these one day to end and the next day to begin with the Jewish and Muslim calendars at sunset. And in medieval Italy, the Christians were doing this too, hence these Italian hours. So that possibly explains why sunset was chosen in preference to sunrise. Let's continue that for way over. I think this one over here goes right up to 11 or 12, I think. And Italian hours don't look terribly good when it's not declining to the west, where you get sunset better. But let's persist with this for a moment. And I'm going to mark in a line marked M, which you quite commonly see on Italian hours in Italy. Italian hours, sundials in Italy, where I imagine it stands for mezzogiorno. It might stand for meridiana, I don't know, but it certainly means the middle of the day as far as I'm concerned. And if you take that line labeled M, where it intersects our line 18 and also intersects the equinoctial line, unsurprisingly, the time of midday using the Italian hour system at an equinox is 18 hours after sunset. Obviously, the midday at an equinox is 6 hours after sunrise. It's equal day, equal night. So you've got 12 hours of night. That gives us 18, and it all nicely ties up. Here is exactly the same thing, but on a wall declining 50 degrees to the west. So looking at sunset, and all my funny declination lines now end up on the horizon line. Again, we have the M, the 12, and the 18 lines nicely intersecting, as you see here. It's been nice to see a real sundial looking a bit like that. So let me show this one. And this has not a line marked M, it actually has a full set of equal hours in the common sense, using common hours with 12 line. And you'll see that the I get there, the 12 o'clock line, the 18-hour line, and the equinoctial line, which is characterized by having a little ram drawn on it, they do indeed meet at a point. And this has nicely shows the winter solstice and summer solstice lines as well. But I don't know where I got this from, but it was in an article I published and gave a citation there. This photograph I took myself, so I have much less worry about its copyright. I took it in a place called Frascati, which is quite near Rome, but a bit to the south of Rome. And this is more like a real Italian hour sundial, very primitive, not much in the way of ornamentation. The winter solstice and summer solstice lines are implicit rather than explicit. You can, though, just about make out the equinoctial line. And indeed, if you look very carefully, you'll see the shadow of the gnomon, the tip of the gnomon, is actually on the intersection of the 16-hour line and the equinoctial line. It was on the day of the September solstice, and I waited until it was 16 hours when I took this photograph. And do you know, it's only this week that I realized that this is not the sort of Italian hours which you see in my diagram on the left, which is what the Italians call ore italiane comuni, common Italian hours. This is the sort of Italian hours that Mario was talking about in part 2 in the March Bulletin, part 2 of his article. This is ore italiano da campanile, bell tower Italian hours. Well, see, if you look at the 18-hour line where it intersects, no, better still, if you look where the meridian line intersects the equinoctial line, you see it's between 17 and 18, very roughly 17 and a half, because bell tower Italian hours start half an hour after sunset, which is when they ring the Angelus bell for the Ave Maria prayers. And they superseded the common Italian hours sometime at the end, towards the end of the 17th century. And so you've got, since the sunset, the time system begins half an hour after sunset, you've only got 11 and a half hours after that before we come to sunrise. 11 and a half plus 6 gives you 17 and a half, which is what you have in this photograph. So although I took the photograph at the time, I hadn't noticed this little point. Right, back to the regular Italian hours, and now I'm going to go to Babylonian hours, which is exactly the same thing, but the other way around. 1 hour after sun's rise, 2 hours, and all the rest of them. And I put in the M for meridian line, and that should intersect the 6-hour line on the equinoctial line, which it does. And just as with the Italian hour lines, it looks better if you're declining to the west. Here, it looks better if you're declining to the east. So we're looking at sunrise on the horizon line here. And you won't often see a pure Babylonian hours sundial. I don't think I've ever seen one myself, except this one, which was done by a friend of mine at my dictation. It's painted on the wall of a barn. And he took this photograph 2 hours after sunrise on the day of, again, the September equinox. And you can see the shadow of a nodus pretty much on the intersection of the equinoctial line and the 2-hour Babylonia, 2 hours after sunrise. Back to this with Italian hours and Babylonian hours superimposed. And if you want a really messy sundial, you can superimpose common hours as well and get a nice messy figure, which gives me the cue for looking at the Nuremberg sundial, which was featured in part 1 of Mario's 2 articles. And you have to look very carefully to see anything at all. And it's a horrible, horrible mess. There's lots of Latin there, lots of numbers, lots of fragments of line. What on earth is going on? Well, to be helpful, Mario, republishes this diagram prepared by Karl Schwarzinger, I think he's certainly German. I think he lives in Nuremberg, and he came up with this diagram, which makes life a bit easier. Well, maybe. personally, I had to look at this extremely carefully and use a hand lens to see what was going on. And as always, I found it much easier to do the thing myself. So I'll show you what I did, which was to start with this diagram, which we're looking at all the time. Perhaps I should go back. The thing that most struck me is, do you see he's got a 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. He's labeling the gaps between declination lines rather than declination lines themselves. So here I am persisting in labeling the 8 for the line, not the gap. That means 8 hours of daylight, 9 hours of daylight, 10 hours of daylight. But in this slightly modified version, my numbers are in the gaps, and 9 is the sort of nominal number of hours for the gap. It strictly begins with 8.5 hours and ends with 9.5 hours. And then that ends into the 10-hour gap, which ends with 10.5 hours. Let's mark those in. So this declination line, this third declination line, represents a day which is exact daylight period, exactly 9.5 hours. And the next one is daylight period, exactly 10.5 hours. And for the whole of that gap, we deem it to be a 10-hour day, and just accept the fact that at the beginning of the month, the hours are slightly short, and at the end of the month, they're slightly long. And we can mark in. I've shown you how to mark out, divide the day into 2 parts, 3 parts, 4 parts, 7 parts, and 12 parts. Well, here it is, just that gap divided into 10 parts. And we can consider how long an hour actually is at the beginning of the month and at the end of the month. Well, 9.5 can be described as 19 divided by 2. 2 9s are 18 plus 1, and 10.5 is 21 divided by 2. Divide these numbers by 10, and you get 21 over 20 and 19 over 20. So we are 1/20th of an hour short of a common hour at the beginning of the month, and 1/20th of an hour over a common hour at the end of the month. 1/20th of an hour is, of course, 3 minutes. So at the beginning of this 10-hour month, our hours are actually 57 minutes long. At the end, they're 63 minutes long. Well, no harm so far. Let's mark in the 11 divisions for the 11-hour period gap. And again, we can divide 10.5 by 11. Well, that's 21 over 2 divided by 11, which gives me 21 over 22. Here is my natural pedantry coming to the fore. I don't like the fact that when we have this, we've inevitably got to have a jump. When we jump across this line, the error changes from 1/20th of an hour to 1/22nd of an hour, obviously with a sign difference. And I feel that's inelegant. I would like to have the same error either side of this jump. And I don't care that that's going to upset the beginning, the end of the month, because you have a whole month to get used to this gradual change. This is a sudden change, and it would upset my psychology to have this asymmetry. So what you can do is, instead of having 9.5 hours and 10.5, you have 9 and 9/19, just under 9.5 hours and just under 10.5 hours. Strictly, the rule is that for the whole number 10, you write a numerator 10 and then twice 10 plus 1. Here, twice 9 plus 1 gives you the 19. Now, this works out splendidly. You divide 10 and 10/21s by 10, that's an easy division. You get 1 and 1/21 an hour. So it's actually a slightly smaller error than it was before. So we're actually winning on 2 counts. When we come to the 11 hours, I accept with some reluctance that dividing 10 and 10/11s by 11 is quite tricky, but that isn't going to put me off. What I'm going to do is to regard this 10 as 11 minus 1. We'll agree that's 11, agree that's 10, with 10 and 10/21 afterwards. So 11 minus 1 expressed as 21 over 21 plus 10 over 21 gives me nice simple arithmetic, because 21 minus 21 plus 10 is 11. Wonderful. So we can express this as 11 minus 11 over 21, and the division now comes trivial. I like to have my arithmetic so you can do it in your head. Divide this by 11, and we get 1 minus 1 over 21. So we have a nice symmetrical jump. this I regard as an improvement to the design of the Nuremberg Sundial. So maybe next time they repaint it, they can incorporate this upgrade. Now I'm happy to go through this for everything else, all the other numbers put in. And this is my rendering of the Nuremberg Sundial, which is much less cluttered than what you see for real. And it's all very nice. One little detail, though, which involves me backtracking to here. Right, do you see I've put in a little yellow spot, one of my yellow markers. Inevitably, you're going to have occasions where the sun is, or the shadow is on one of these lines. And let's suppose it's exactly here. It's going to happen twice a year. Of course, it could happen at night, no problem. But what's the time? Well, if you think of it as being in a 10-hour scheme, we are just after 9 o'clock. If you think of it as being in the 11-hour regime, we're just before 10 o'clock. So that's just after 9. This is just before 10, and we're halfway between. Nearly an hour different. We're not fussing about 1/20th of an hour, depending which you're looking at. It's nearly a whole hour different. This is a horrible ambiguity, and one assumes there must have been, I think, legislation. You can't do it mathematically to decide in advance. You publish a calendar to say it will be a 10-hour day right up till the end of, well, 24th of February is just about the usual date here. And then from the 25th of February, we're in the next regime, and you do that come what may. But I'll go to here, and that's where I will stop and share my screen. And if anybody's got any questions on that, by all means, ask. That's my take on Nuremberg hours. Do we have Syed? Has he joined us?
Checking. What are we here? It seems no.
Anybody's got any hands up? What I've just been, which is a fast run through common hours, Italian hours, unequal hours, Babylonian hours, and Nuremberg hours, a whole lot in about 20 minutes. And now you know all sort of common hours that were available in ancient times. But Mario is absolutely right that Italian hours is probably the most important of all the hour systems that came after the dividing the daylight period into 12. So anyone about to ask a question? Don't see anyone eagerly going to.
No raised hands.
No raised hands.
No comments so far.
No comments. Well, do have a look.
Okay. There is one by Chris.
Chris again.
Yeah. Please. Yeah.
Come in, Chris.
Yeah, I was just going to say that you say you've not seen a dial which only had Babylonian hours. Well, I've made one which only had Babylonian hours on one side of the gnomon and Italian hours on the other side of the gnomon.
Oh, very clever. So a sort of halfway to a Babylonian scheme.
Yeah, I mean, I could show it if you have a minute for me to share my screen.
Yes, all right. Let him share his screen, Martins.
Yes, you can.
Where's my picture gone? This one here. Right. Is my sharing working or not?
Not yet, but it will do. You have to
select the screen, confirm.
Click on it.
Yeah. I have to confirm it somehow.
Yes, with blue button. Somewhere.
Yes, there we are. Yep.
Okay.
So you can see this dial, can you?
I can see.
There's the.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
I've shown it at a.
Yes. That has both, doesn't it?
Yeah. So on the
conference you put this out.
I did. So the dial, and this is why at our last conference I was a bit concerned that Fred Sawyer was going to show us that there is in Columbia University in the university in New York that there was a dial which consists of a sphere casting its shadow on the plane it's sitting on, which turns out that it never was, and it's lost anyway. So this is a sphere casting its shadow on the plane it's sitting on. And those lines are exactly the same as the lines of a conventional horizontal sundial, except that their numbering is doubled. So the 8 o'clock line, what you'd think of as being an 8 o'clock line, is doubled, and it's called 16 kind of thing. So on the right hand side, these are all times since sunrise, and on the left hand side, they're times to sunset. They're really co-Italian hours, actually. I think so. Strictly speaking, Italian hours go up to 23
hours to sunset.
Yeah, they're hours to sunset. So this picture here is
sunset.
showing that you've got 8 hours of daylight left. To me, that's a more convenient measure rather than saying that it's 16 o'clock sort of thing.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely agree with you.
Anyway, that's what that does.
Yes, that's very nice. What's more, the Columbia University has very much been in the news recently. And if you take a daily paper or look at your television, you will see photographs of students camped out at Columbia University. And all the photographs I've seen have had the base of this famous Columbia University sundial that Fred was talking about. The base is still there, and you can see students standing on it to this day.
Yes.
Well, at least till Monday, when I think the students were cleared away. But there they are, and you can see the base of the sundial very clearly.
Yeah. Well, it's good to know that students are still revolting.
They're still revolting, yes. Fortunately, they're not revolting here yet, but right now, if you unshare,
so how do I
any other hands up? Yes, that's fine.
Oh no, sorry, I think it.
No other hands.
No, right.
Comments?
Well, thank you all very much, everybody, for.
Just I'm reminding about the survey. So there's 6 responses right now, but if you
click on the green button which says chat, bottom, just left of center, probably at the bottom of your screen. If you move your cursor down to the bottom of your screen, you should find a button of chat.
Posting once again the link, so you could try to reply right after the call as well.
Yes. So
and it seems we have no more comments or questions.
Right, so it's goodbye from me. If I can get my hand in the way, yes.